Okay, so you're a beginner and you want to learn to fly fish. If you followed our other instructional videos, this is the one that ties it all together. We're going to be on the water and show you exactly how to catch that fish.
That's a big brown.
Okay, so if you've watched our other videos, we've gone through a number of things in the first 4 videos. If you haven't seen those videos, click on the link in the description and it will take you to our free online fly fishing course where all the videos and kind of explanation of everything is laid out. We recommend you go from the first one to the last one, which will be this one, and we'll probably do some other ones later. But the way we have it laid out is you can start to learn a little bit. In our first video, we talked the overview of fly fishing, kind of what the components are. Hopefully, if you've gotten to this point, you've gone through some of those videos and understand what we've talked about, but I'm going to recap it just in case. So in a nutshell, fly fishing, you're going to need a fly rod and a reel. And in those previous videos, I talked about the reel's function, talked about the rod. In one of the videos, also mentioned the quickest way for you to get on the water and fishing is likely going to be buying a kit. We have a lot of those listed. Again, the link in the description. So today what we're going to do is we're going to put this rod and this reel and the line and the leader and the tippet and the fly, we're going to put all that in action and show you how it actually works when you're out on the water. I would never recommend going and buying all this stuff and then going directly out onto a stream or a lake. There's a lot of steps in between that you're going to need to know and understand before you hit the water, which can be a frustrating experience if you don't know the casting mechanics, if you don't know how to tie the knots, if you don't know flies to select, and different things like that. So what we'll do today is we're just going to go through an approach that I would take in 2 conditions. Number 1, we're going to use a dry fly, which means a fly that floats on top of the water. We're going to go through in another video, there will be info on how to select a fly. You get to this river here, what do you tie on? How do you know what bugs the fish are eating? The second approach is going to be a nymphing approach. So a dry fly floats, whereas a nymph will sink. And there's a very, very simple rig that we'll show you, and that we talked about in a previous video, that will help you reduce the amount of headaches, but still catch fish but keep it simple at the same time. So we'll go through those 2 techniques. Big disclaimer here, I would very, very highly recommend, if you haven't done so, get out and practice some of your casting. We do have a video on casting that will be, again, in that description link below, that will talk about just getting started, the mechanics of the cast, how things are supposed to work. I would recommend reviewing that. There's a lot of other videos. Orvis has some great fly casting videos with Pete Kutzler. There's a lot of them on YouTube that you can learn. So I recommend getting the casting stroke down, because that's going to solve a lot of the headaches that you potentially run into when you're out on the water for the first or second time. So practice the casting. That's probably my biggest piece of advice. Next to that would be know your knots. We've got some knots, again, in the link below to all the knots that you're going to need to know. And it walks through all those things that just to get the basics to be able to be out here. So I'm going to assume we've done all that. I'm going to assume that you've probably got your fly fishing kit or some setup. We do have a lot of kit options. One of the reasons that I mentioned the kit before is that it comes with the rod, the reel, the line, the leader, and sometimes even flies, so that you can hit the water, literally just tie that fly on and start to fish. So that's what the point we're going to take this from today is, assuming you've gone through some of those basics, you understand the idea of what the fish are going to eat, kind of whether it's on top or bottom, and we'll walk through that as we go. But for starters, we're just going to rig my rod here and going to tie on 1 single dry fly. And we'll start with that, and I'll walk you through the mechanics of how that works. Once we get a fish on a dry fly, I'm going to switch gears and we'll go for one with a nymph, which is one that sinks. The reason you need to know the difference between at least those 2 is that some days, like here, we're out here in the middle of summer in a high mountain stream. We have a lot higher chance of catching fish on a dry fly today because there's a lot of bugs around. Ants, beetles, grasshoppers, they all fall in the water. So the fish this time of year are looking up. So for me, one of the funnest parts of dry fly or fly fishing is dry flies. So it's also very visual. You float the fly, and you see the fish come up and eat it. So that's probably one of the best options to start with, is a dry fly, because you can see what the fly is doing, you can see when the fish hits it. Then again, like I said, after that we're going to switch over to a nymph, which goes beneath the water. A lot of times during the year, fish might not be taking dry flies. In fact, more often than not, they will be eating the nymphs or bugs that live underneath the water that you need to go beneath the water and have other things set up. So I'll show you that setup. Stay to the end of the video, because I'm also going to go over the flies that we used, so you know exactly some of the options that you can pick in order to go out wherever you may be, whether you're in the Midwest and you're dealing with bass ponds, or whether you're in the West and trout streams or trout ponds. It's kind of the same thing. The flies may differ a little bit, but the techniques were going to be very, very similar. So we're going to go ahead and get started on the water, get this rod rigged up, and catch a fish on a dry fly. Okay, quick little tip here. In order to string your rod, I often assume people know more about this than they do. So what you want to do is you want to take your fly line to leader junction. So it's where the thick stuff ties into the thinner stuff that's more transparent. So then I'll just grab that junction, and it kind of creates a little point I can use to feed up through each guide. You do not want to miss a guide as you thread this through. So just take your time and make sure you get every single guide, and then once it's at the top, you can pull the extra out. Okay, so I'm going to work my way into position here. I don't want to be too close because I don't want to spook the fish, but I know there's several fish in this tiny little seam, which is where the fast water meets the slow water on the other side. So again, my idea here, the intent, is to cast above where the fish are. And if you've gone back to the other videos and practiced your casting motion, you know the casting is an up and down kind of 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock motion. And then you can do some false casts to get the line out there, and then deliver no takers. Oh, slashed at it. Lost track of my fly. Slashed at it again. Dang. Okay, failure on that last fish. Happens. So I'm moving up to the next hole. Just in case you're wondering, this big bag on my back is my camera gear. You don't normally carry something this large necessarily, but I take pictures at the same time. So here's another little run. I did have the fish come up a couple times and not break the surface, but he came up to eat the fly and rejected me at the last minute. Don't worry, that you'll get used to it. That's how it goes. Anyway, so we're just going to keep going until we find some fish here. Dude, no way. Dang it. You missed it. Okay, so 2 strikes. I've had 2 fish. Well, one was on, the other short struck it. So the dry fly fishing is still on the table here, but I'm going to try this next hole. One thing I didn't mention is dry fly floatant. It's a material, usually gel or oil based, that you apply to your fly to help it float. Every once in a while, as you fish during the day, you'll notice the flies start to sink. So as long as you have a good drag-free drift, the fly may pick up particles or just get waterlogged. So it's always a good idea to dry that off and apply some floatant. So I'm going to go up here, use dry fly, the same kind of setup, 1 dry fly. If that doesn't produce, I'm going to tie on a nymph, which is kind of your next strategy you'd want to do. And there he is. Ate the dry fly. And we'll net him. All right, well, it took a couple, 3 different holes, but we got him. He ate the dry fly right off the surface like we thought. This here is a Colorado cutthroat. Little guy. Whoops. And we'll release him. So that was kind of an interesting scenario. Normal spots didn't produce fish, but you keep at it. Make sure your fly is dressed, meaning has floatant on it, and you just keep going where you think the fish will be. Today's really hot, the water's really low, so probably a lot of reasons why the fish aren't going to eat super hard. But anyway, that's the idea for a dry fly. We're going to now switch to a dry dropper, and that's probably for a lot of people a little harder to fish because we're going to tie a nymph onto the dry fly. So we take a piece of tippet and we'll cut this fly off. We're going to tie a triple surgeon's knot, leave a tag about 4 inches, tie our dry fly, and then the nymph is going to be on the end about 18 inches down. So that way when we cast, it's the same concept. We're casting up and down, so I'll cast up into this hole. You may have some hit the dry fly, but you'll be amazed that, like say, for every 1 fish on a dry fly, you may catch 5 or 6 on a nymph, because most of the fish are going to be down beneath eating. So that's what we'll accomplish with this next little section, is using the dry dropper. And then to finish it off, we'll go to an indicator rig, which is probably the simplest rig, and catch some fish with that. That's going to be a fish. On the dropper. Come here, buddy. Okay, we'll get the hand wet before we touch the fish. And this is a little cutthroat that ate the dropper. So even though they're not coming up for dries, catching them on a dropper is good mojo. We'll send him on his way. And he was basically right where I thought he would be. Just on the seam of that slow and fast water. Okay, as we've used a dry fly and a dry dropper with the nymph, so that's one technique I'd say with the dry fly. The second technique I mentioned earlier is with a strike indicator. This is probably the easiest of the techniques because, like I said, fish by and large feed underneath the surface. So a day like today where we thought they'd be coming up and eating dry flies a lot more, didn't turn out to be that, but we know there are fish, we know the fish have to eat if they're in a river. So I'm gonna tie on this little strike indicator. This is called an Oros indicator. We have you can get them on a link down below in the description. And what I've done there is these actually just screw right on to and clamp your leader or your tippet. And then down beneath that, I've got my fly. And you just want to set this depth based on the depth of the river you're fishing. Usually, let's say an average of 18 inches for this technique and this style. If you're fishing deeper, faster water, there's a whole nother series of videos that you may want to watch called the Bounce Rig. If you search for that on our website or our YouTube channel, you'll find the setup for that. But this one is a really good beginner rig. That's when I take people for the first time or second time. This is the type of rig that I'll use very often. It doesn't have much chance for tangles. You only have to tie on one fly with your clinch knot. And it's relatively easy to see what's going on because this is bright on the water. It doesn't spook the fish too much. So what I do is I cast this upstream, just like I've done before, as you've kind of been watching, and I let that float towards me, making sure that this floats naturally. So if I notice that my line is pulling it or it's getting sucked underwater or something, I'm gonna try to adjust or mend my line so that this indicator or bobber floats naturally in the water. What that translates to is the fly down beneath it will also be floating that way. So again, the technique is just approach the fish from behind. I'm moving upstream direction, casting upstream, letting it float down to me, and just recasting as I go. So we're gonna give the strike indicator method a try. He kind of doesn't count because he's so small, but that's his bad for eating my fly. Tiny little cutthroat. He ate this nymph, and so we're just gonna let him go. And that's kind of a typical fish for a high mountain stream. So again, I'm casting upstream, watching that indicator. What I saw as I cast that up, the indicator stopped, didn't go under. I set the hook and there the fish was, so pretty easy. Okay guys, so that kind of wraps up our on the water section. I think the most important thing to remember, if you have any confusion on anything, watch the other videos that we have in this series. It's kind of a step-by-step what you need to know. But really the most important thing is just to get out on the water and practice. The more you practice, the better you get. And I remember when I was first getting started with a fly and a fly rod, it took me quite a while on this one river to catch some fish, and I was about ready to throw in the towel. Caught a fish, and then it kind of changed after that. So give it some time, practice. Hit us up below if you have any questions in the comments, or give us a ring at our fly shop. We have one of the biggest fly shops in the world located in Orem, Utah. Online at flyfishfood.com. Pretty much everything you'll ever need to fly fish, tie flies, and have fun in the sport. So again, thanks for joining us. Like this video, please subscribe to our channel, and we'll catch you out on the water. Okay, so we're gonna just recap this video because there's a lot to digest. If you've watched all of our other videos, kind of outlining how to get started in fly fishing, this is the summary of that on the water experience that I took you through. If you haven't watched those other videos, click on the link below or go to our YouTube channel playlist and look at the beginners fly tying course. If you want to see everything with all the products that we talk about, we do have a page on our website that is linked below that will take you to our beginning fly fishing 101 course that walks you through everything that we have, all the videos, all the products that you need, the gear, how to tie some knots, how to set everything up, really everything from soup to nuts on how to get into fly fishing. So in this last video where we're kind of putting everything together on the water as a summary of everything we've talked about in prior videos, the thing you'll see, and this is one of the things I say when you're just getting into it, let's make it as simple as possible. So as you saw in the video, I started out with the dry fly rig, which if you go to one of the previous videos, I talked about having a fly fishing kit, just a beginner kit, which included the rod, the reel, the line, leader, tippet, some flies. Anyway, so assuming you are able to get out to the water and put all that together, you'll notice that as I tie the dry fly on, it's just one fly. In this case, I've got a Parachute Adams and a Bionic Ant. These are two really good all-around flies that can work in a bunch of different situations. Like I've mentioned before, you really probably want to dial in the body of water that you're fishing to see what the fish are going to be exposed to as far as insects. Because most of the time the trout or whatever it is you're fishing for are going to be eating aquatic insects or terrestrial insects that fall in. So we're not going to get into that here. We do have some follow-up videos and some previous ones on our YouTube channel that talks about how to know what to tie on. But for now, suffice it to say, I've tied on my fly with the clinch knot, go to the river, and as you see in the video, I cast upstream into likely holding spots where fish are going to be. They tend to want to be where there's protection from the current, there's food supply, and they're not going to be attacked by a predator. So there's a couple of protection scenarios that they're looking for, and then food. So you'll get, this is kind of an experience thing as you learn and you get a little bit more experience behind the fly rod. So anyway, that's probably the quickest way is to tie on your dry fly and go out there and cast it. You want to do some casting practice like we mentioned before, but spend the time, do the practice, and you get out on the water and start to see results. Now the other scenarios that we talked about, one was the dry dropper. So you would have your dry fly and you would just tie onto the end of the dry fly a little bit of tippet, which is a spool of leader-ish type material, tippet material. It's usually made of, it's a monofilament, so it's usually made of nylon or fluorocarbon. And onto that, after let's say 18 inches down on average, sometimes you need longer, sometimes shorter, you would tie a nymph. And a nymph often has a bead on it, so that's one clue that you know that that's supposed to sink. These beads are made of tungsten or brass and they tend to sink really quickly. So I've got a couple of the flies that I used as nymphs on a dry dropper rig. Primarily a Duracell jig, a Frenchie, and a zebra midge. We'll have links below to these individual flies, and again, if you want to go to our website, you can purchase them there, or you can learn to tie them if you want to get into fly tying aspect of it. And then the other scenario that we talked about is also a very simple one, and that is with a small indicator or strike indicator or bobber. And after that, you have 2 to 3 feet-ish or maybe more of tippet or leader material, or combination of the two, and then you'll put your nymph. And again, you're casting upstream in both of these scenarios at about a 45-degree angle, letting the fly get down to depth where the fish will be holding. And then as you see the indicator pause or move or dart, you would then want to set the hook downstream. Remember, the fish are facing upstream, flies are going downstream. You want to pull the rod downstream so that it pulls that hook right into the fish's mouth and it gets them stuck so that you can catch them and release them as quickly as possible, or eat them if you're going to eat them. Anyway, so these are some flies that you can use to get started. We'll list some others below. And again, if you click on the link below that takes you to our main fly fishing beginners course, we list a lot of the flies, and again, all of the material, gear, all the setup, the rods, the reels, the lines, anything that you'll need to get started. It's a great way to do it. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments below. But check us out at flyfishfood.com and check out our other videos.